Hello, this is Ralph K. Ginorio, and welcome to the 14th installment of my video adaptation of my lessons on the historical background to the 9/11 atrocities. Where we have been is we have taken a history of the Islamic world in a brief survey fashion, from the visitation to the Prophet Muhammad up through the end of the Christian Crusades and their failure. And we therefore have covered the time when Islam was the premier civilization on the planet, first class intellectually, socially, politically, in terms of lifestyle. And the lifestyle that the Muslims had in the Middle East inspired the Christian Crusaders to want some of that themselves. They wanted silks, they wanted spices, they wanted more warm and in the wintertime and more cool in the summertime. And these development of luxury tastes are one of the prime aspirations in Europe that lead to, ultimately, the voyages of discovery into the European ascendancy in the world. In other words, their reality is a combination of three things, as the axiom goes. It is a complex interweaving of three primal forces: matter, energy, and enlightened self-interest. So the Crusaders wanted what the Arabs and other Muslims had, which was a much higher standard of living. But nemesis was to come to the Islamic world. And it was not to come from Europe or from Europe's Crusaders. The nemesis of the Islamic world was the Mongols. The Mongols are a pagan people out of Central Asia. And for centuries they were a minor tribe in the distant populations north of the Great Wall, north of the great civilized Chinese Empire. But around the end of the 1100s, around the end of the 12th century, there is a global climate change called the Little Ice Age, which cools temperatures globally and affects human civilization mightily. And this Little Ice Age makes it suddenly much harder to live on the Mongolian steppes. At the same time, there's the human element. Communists are very wrong. You cannot look at history simply as a series of impersonal forces pressing against one another, as if somehow physics or chemistry was the history of human action in this world. That's nonsense. Individual people matter, their stories matter, their beliefs and dreams matter, and the way they do business matters. That means their morality matters. Genghis Khan, born Temujin, ends up doing something that had never been done in Central Asia before. He unifies his people, the Mongols, and then unifies the other horse nomads of the Asiatic steppe into a massive army. Now, the Mongols were pagans, but they believed that they would unify the 8 corners of the world under one tent. And the Mongols were tougher than the Arabs by this point. The Arabs had had easy living for several centuries, and they were tougher than the Turks, and they were tougher than the forces of the Khwarizm Shah, the Islamic Empire in West Central Asia. When the Mongols came knocking, it was doom. The Mongols tended to fight in a crescent formation and move in a crescent formation, and they moved across the land like the buffalo used to move across the American West. By the time you spotted a Mongol ahead of you, very likely there were Mongols already behind you on your flanks. And what the Mongols understood was how to apply terror as a form of communication. When they approached a city, the city had an opportunity to immediately throw open their gates and throw themselves on the mercy of the Mongols. But, of course, who's going to do that when they have wonderful city walls? Very few did that. So the Mongols would storm and take the place, either by siege or by storm. And when they took the place, the Mongols did something that no one else did. It was one of their unique contributions as a conquering race. They thought that citification turned men into girly men, turned women into something unknown, turned human life into something sick, obscene, and decadent. So the Mongols waged war not just against nations and cultures and people, but against the lifestyle of civilized people, against cities. Most conquerors would take cities and make them their own. We would take cities as the United States and after conquering them set them free and rebuild them better than they were before. What the Mongols would do is they would take that city apart stone by stone, step by step, and turn it back into pasture land. This is a violent, brutal process. But the Mongols would always save 1 or 2 or 3 handfuls of prisoners, and they would strap them up to sticks. Not quite crucify them, but strap them up to sticks, and force them to watch as their women and children, their men, their relatives, their homes were, in the modern euphemism, deconstructed, as their world was destroyed, as their loved ones were raped and murdered. And then these half-mad witnesses were set loose on the world. They were freed to spread the word of what Mongols were like if they were not given what they want right away. And if your town was visited by one of these half-mad witnesses, when the Mongols showed up, there would be a faction within your walls ready to open them up right away and give the Mongols anything they wanted in return for being spared the terrible fate of that other town. In Genghis Khan's time, the Mongols reach south and they take China. Northern and southern China were separate at this point. The northern and southern Sung empires were taken both by Genghis Khan. And he told his men, you may conquer China, but don't ever live like a Chinaman. You may conquer the Chinese, don't live within the cities. Remain in your camps outside the cities. Remain pure, hard, and nomadic. Remain who you are, the greatest warriors in the world. Well, for a while that admonition worked. In the time of Genghis Khan's sons, the Mongols expanded westward, south into India, into the Middle East, and into Russia. No one could stop them. In India, they were slowed down by the territory and by the hard fighting of several Islamic city-states, but the truth is, no one could stop the Mongols. And the Mongols took the eastern 2/3 of the contiguous Islamic territory on planet Earth. And when they took that territory, it was like hitting a brilliant scientist in the head with a steel crowbar, causing traumatic brain injury from which it's almost impossible to recover. When the Mongols took the Middle East, they destroyed cities. They burned libraries. They thought of civilization itself as the enemy. And when the most civilized society on the planet, the Islamic civilization, lost and lost and lost cities and regions, libraries and thinkers, it was transformed. It was transformed by trauma, the way a traumatic head injury can transform the life of anyone unfortunate enough to undergo one. In the end, many of the Mongols were converted to Islam. The most terrible Mongol after Genghis Khan himself is a Mongol called Tamerlan, or Timur the Lame. Timur the Lame was utterly vicious as a warlord. And from Timur the Lame's empire comes the Mughals, the Mongol Muslims who ruled northern India until the time of the British Raj. Persia and Iraq, but especially Persia and the East. The Khwarizm region of Central Asia, the area of Afghanistan, all once were civilized. They were part of the Islamic society, and they are now wastelands. And they are to remain wastelands to the present day in many cases, or for many hundreds of years, as in the case of Persia or India. Second or even third class societies in terms of the quality of their economics or their intellectual product. The truth is, the Islamic world never recovers from the Mongol conquests. That plasticity of mind, that intellectual curiosity, that delightful spark that made Islamic civilization pop as the most vibrant civilization 1,000 years ago is kicked out of it by the Mongol conquests. And even though the Mongols' high tide ultimately recedes, the Islamic world is never the same. In this period of eclipse, the Muslim world is by no means done. In fact, it has a sort of renaissance under the Ottoman Turks. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks achieve a 1,000-year goal when Turkish cannon batter down the walls of Christian Constantinople, putting paid to the last city of Imperial Rome. The Eastern Empire finally falls in the year 1453, and for the first time, Islamic armies don't have to do a reach-around to attack Europe through Spain. For the first time, launching straight from their bases in the Middle East, the most powerful forces in the Islamic world can reach for the heart of Europe. And twice they get as far as Vienna, in the center of Europe itself, geographically the center of Europe. The Ottoman Turks do this. They do this with armies of Janissaries, which are the descendants of Christian communities that are conquered. Boys raised to be fanatical fedayeen, fanatical suicide, death commandos. The Janissaries are the most dangerous troops because they don't mind dying. They are absolute fanatical Muslim jihadis. The Ottoman Empire has guns as good as anything in Europe at the time. More troops under one command than any European monarch, including the Holy Roman Emperor. And so their armies penetrate deep into Europe. Even though Europe withstands the high tide of Ottoman Turkish power, turning the tide at the naval battle of Lepanto in 1571, the Ottoman Turks retain control over North Africa and the Middle East west of Iran. And that unified empire is going to remain a fact of politics, geography, and culture until the end of the First World War. As the Islamic mind, the Islamic culture stagnates, as the openness to new ideas is replaced by a hidebound traditionalism and a nascent fundamentalism, as the Ottoman Turks become satisfied with what they have, at the very moment when Columbus sails the ocean blue, Europe takes the rest of the world and turns it into a base for European wealth and power, where Europe during the 15, 16, 17, and 1800s conquers all but 5 or 6 nations on earth. The Islamic world remains standing still. They are eclipsed. By Napoleon's time, after Napoleon's time, the Ottoman Empire is called, in Queen Victoria's age, the sick man of Europe. A pathetic, weak empire that the British and the other European empires are beginning to dominate and take apart. The British take Egypt from the Ottoman Empire. The French build the Suez Canal through through Egypt, which is nominally under the Ottoman Sultan, but in fact a European colony. But with the exception of Egypt and a few other places, the majority of the Ottoman Empire remains under Islamic rule, at least officially. They may be economically more and more subject to European power, but in political terms, they can console themselves by the fact that they are faithful Muslims following faithful Muslim rulers. All of this will change with the war to end all wars, and that is our subject for next time. Thank you for your attention.